They told me the war was 7,000 miles away in the desert. They were wrong. The war was right here, behind a pane of reinforced glass in the ICU. I stood there, still wearing my dusty boots from the flight home, staring at the woman in the bed. Her face was a map of purple and black bruises. Her jaw was wired shut. One eye was swollen completely closed. That wasn't just my sister, Brooke. That was a message, and I was going to find the person who sent it. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Coming home was supposed to be the easy part. After 6 deployments with Delta Force, I had finally put in my papers for extended leave. I wanted peace. I wanted to sit on the porch of our family ranch, drink cold beer, and help Brooke run her bakery. She was the only pure thing left in our family, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who took care of Mom before she passed. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I wanted to surprise them. I drove my truck straight from the airfield to Brooke's bakery, the Sweet Crumb, in the center of town. I imagined the smell of cinnamon and her shouting my name when I walked through the door. But when I pulled up, the smell wasn't cinnamon. It was bleach. The windows were dark. A jagged line of yellow police tape stretched across the door. My stomach dropped. I jumped out of the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs in a way it never did during a firefight. I ducked under the tape and tried the door. Locked. I looked through the glass. The display cases were smashed. Tables were overturned. And on the checkerboard floor, right where customers usually stood to order coffee, there was a dark, dried stain. A lot of it. Closed by order of the sheriff, a voice said behind me. I spun around. It was a young deputy, barely 20 years old. He looked nervous seeing a guy my size, with a tactical bag over his shoulder and a look of murder in his eyes. "Where is she?" I asked. My voice sounded like gravel. "If you mean the owner, she's at County General," the deputy muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "Nasty fall. Clumsy woman. Clumsy." I didn't say another word. I got back in my truck and drove to the hospital at 80 miles an hour. The doctor tried to stop me from seeing her, talking about stabilizing her condition and emotional shock. I didn't push him. I just walked past him. When I saw Brooke in that bed, the rage didn't come as a fire. It came as ice. It froze my blood. I sat next to her. She was sedated, her breathing shallow. I gently lifted her hand. Her knuckles were bruised, defensive wounds. She had fought back. She fell down the stairs at the bakery, the doctor said, standing in the doorway with a clipboard. Tragic accident. Sheriff Grant filed the report himself. I looked at the doctor. "You went to medical school, didn't you?" He blinked. "Excuse me. You know physics," I said, standing up. "You know that falling downstairs causes impact trauma on the extremities. Knees. Elbows." I pointed to Brooke's face. "This is focused blunt force trauma. Someone held her down. Someone hit her. Repeatedly." The doctor looked away. He was scared. Not of me. He was scared of whoever did this. "The official report says a fall, Hunter. That's all I can say." I looked back at Brooke. I leaned in close to her face to whisper a promise, and that's when I saw it. On her upper arm, hidden by the hospital gown, there was a deep, peculiar bruise. It wasn't round. It was shaped like a star. A heavy, metal object had been pressed into her skin with immense force. I knew that shape. Sheriff Grant wore a massive, custom silver ring. A star. He used to brag about it being his judging gavel. He didn't just hurt her. He branded her. I left the hospital without signing the visitor log. I needed to go to the family ranch. My brother, Julian, and his wife, Morgan, lived in the main house. Brooke lived in the guest cottage out back. Julian would be losing his mind. He was the older brother, the protector. If he knew Brooke was hurt, he was probably already loading his shotgun. I pulled up the long dirt driveway as the sun was setting. The house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. There were no lights on in Brooke's cottage. I walked into the main house. "Julian," I yelled. I found them in the dining room. They were eating dinner. Let me repeat that. My sister was lying in a hospital bed with her face shattered, and my brother Julian was cutting into a steak. "Hunter." Julian dropped his fork. He looked tired, his eyes red, but he wasn't angry. He looked defeated. "We didn't know you were coming. Why aren't you at the hospital?" I asked, walking up to the table. "I didn't take off my jacket. Sheriff Grant told us to give her space," Julian said, his voice shaking. He said Brooke was drinking. That she tripped. "It's a mess, Hunter. We're just trying to keep it quiet so she doesn't get in legal trouble for public intoxication." "Legal trouble?" I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "She was beaten, Julian. Look at the photos." "Stop it," a female voice snapped. I looked at Morgan, my sister-in-law. She was sitting at the head of the table. She took a sip of red wine. She looked perfectly put together, hair done, makeup flawless. She didn't look like a woman whose family was in crisis. She looked like a woman who had won a prize. "Don't come in here with your PTSD and start making up conspiracies, Hunter," Morgan said smoothly. "Brooke has been unstable for months. The business was failing. She started drinking. It's sad, but it's her fault." I stared at her. I had never liked Morgan. She was cold, calculating, and she treated Julian like a pet dog. But this was different. There was zero empathy in her eyes. "She wasn't drinking," I said softly, "and the business wasn't failing. I sent her a check last month to expand the kitchen." Morgan paused, just for a second. Her eyes flickered. "Well, she probably drank that money away too," Morgan said, shrugging. She reached for the salt shaker. That's when the room stopped spinning for me. As she reached out, the light from the chandelier caught her wrist. She was wearing a bracelet, a vintage string of pearls with a distinct diamond clasp. It was our grandmother's bracelet. Brooke never took it off. She wore it every single day. She said it was her good luck charm. She would never, ever lend it to Morgan. They hated each other. If Morgan was wearing that bracelet, she didn't get it as a gift. She took it. Or someone took it off Brooke's body and gave it to her. I looked at Morgan's face. She saw me looking at the pearls. She didn't cover them. She didn't look guilty. She smiled. It was a small, tight smile. The kind of smile you give when you think you're untouchable. "Is something wrong, Hunter?" she asked. "No." I lied, forcing my hands to unclench. "I'm just tired. I'm going to go to the cottage." "Good," she said. "Get some rest. You look like you're seeing ghosts." I walked out of the house, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. I didn't go to the cottage. I went to my truck and reached under the seat for my lockbox. I pulled out my sidearm and a handful of small, black devices. The enemy wasn't just the sheriff. The enemy was sitting at my dinner table, eating steak and wearing my sister's jewelry. I sat in the cab of my truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. The darkness of the ranch surrounded me, but my mind was lit up with tactical precision. I wasn't a brother anymore. I was an operator, and my target was inside that house, drinking wine. But I couldn't strike yet. In the military, you don't breach a room until you know where the hostages are. If I stormed back in there and accused Morgan of stealing Brooke's necklace, she'd deny it. Julian would take her side. I'd be the crazy, war-torn brother scaring the family. I'd lose the high ground. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. I watched through the windshield as the dining room lights flickered off. They were moving to the living room. I quietly opened my door and slipped out. I didn't go back to the house. I moved in a crouch toward the 3-car garage. Morgan's car was parked outside, a brand new, white Range Rover. That was odd. Julian's farm income had been tight for years. A $100,000 car didn't fit the budget. I pulled a magnetic GPS tracker and a high-gain audio bug from my kit. I slid under the rear bumper of the Rover and clamped the tracker to the frame. Then, I popped the lock on the driver's side door, a skill I learned in Baghdad, not school, and planted the audio bug deep under the dashboard, wiring it directly into the car's power supply so it would never die. "Talk to me, Morgan," I whispered, closing the door silently. "Tell me everything." I got back into my truck and started the engine. I wasn't going to sleep. I had one more stop to make tonight. The sheriff's station was a brick fortress in the middle of town. Sheriff Grant had been running this county for 20 years. He wasn't just elected, he was anointed. People said you couldn't even buy a gallon of milk in this town without Grant getting a nickel of it. I walked through the front doors. The night shift deputy looked up, the same kid from the bakery. He went pale. "You can't be in here," he stammered, his hand drifting toward his radio. "I'm here to file a report," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the violence inside me. "About an assault. I told you, your sister fell. I'm not talking to you." I cut him off. I looked at the heavy oak door at the back of the room. "I'm talking to him." Before the deputy could stop me, I marched to the door and kicked it open. Sheriff Grant was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, his boots up on the wood. He was a big man, thick-necked, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't jump. He didn't even look surprised. He just slowly lowered a file he was reading and looked at me over his reading glasses. "Hunter," he said, his voice deep and raspy, like tires on gravel. "I heard you were back. I was wondering when you'd come to pay your respects." "My sister is in the ICU," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me. The air smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive cologne. "You filed the report." "I did," Grant said. He took his feet off the desk and leaned forward. That's when I saw it. The ring. A massive silver star on his right ring finger. It caught the light. It was thick, heavy, and jagged. It was a perfect match for the bruise on Brooke's arm. "It was a clumsy accident," Grant continued, watching my eyes. "Brooke has been spiraling. The bakery was failing. She was in debt. Stress makes people clumsy." "The bakery wasn't failing," I said, stepping closer. I was within striking distance now. I could snap his neck before he reached his gun, but I needed answers more than I needed blood. And she wasn't in debt. Grant chuckled. It was a dark, wet sound. "You've been away a long time, son. You don't know what happens in this town. You send your checks, you play hero overseas, but you don't know the reality." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He tossed it across the desk. It slid to a stop in front of me. "Read it." I opened the folder. It was a seizure notice for the land Brooks Bakery stood on. It was dated 3 days ago, but it wasn't a foreclosure from a bank. It was a voluntary transfer of deed. "She signed it over?" I asked, confused. "Brooke would never sell. That place was her life." "Brooke didn't sign it," Grant said, a smirk spreading across his face. "She was incapacitated, mentally unfit. We had to get power of attorney involved to settle her liabilities." I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It wasn't Brooke's handwriting. It was sharp, looped, and confident. "Morgan E. Vance." My blood ran cold. "Your sister-in-law is a very pragmatic woman," Grant said softly. "She understood that the property was worth more as commercial development than as a cupcake shop. She did what was best for the family." "You seized her business because Morgan signed a paper?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "And then you beat her half to death to keep her quiet?" Grant stood up. He was almost as tall as me. He walked around the desk and stood toe-to-toe with me. He didn't fear me. That was his mistake. "Careful, soldier," Grant whispered. "You're not in the desert anymore. You're in my town. And in my town, accidents happen every day. Brakes fail. Houses catch fire. People disappear." He tapped his heavy ring against my chest. Clink, clink. "Go back to your base, Hunter. Take your brother and leave. There's nothing for you here but a plot in the cemetery next to your daddy." I looked at his ring. I looked at his eyes. I memorized every line on his face. "You're right, Grant," I said, backing away slowly. "I'm not in the desert." I reached the door and looked back. In the desert, I have rules of engagement. Here, I don't. I walked out. I didn't go back to the ranch. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, a place with flickering neon lights and no cameras. I set up my laptop and put on my headphones. I activated the bug I had planted in Morgan's car. For 3 hours, there was silence. Just the hum of the engine as she drove somewhere late at night. Then, her phone rang. I heard it ring through the car speakers. She answered it on Bluetooth. "Is he gone?" Morgan's voice came through my headphones, crystal clear. "He came to the station," Grant's voice replied. He knows about the deed. But he can't do anything. He's just a grunt with a gun. He's not just a grunt, Grant, Morgan snapped. She sounded scared. He's Delta. If he digs too deep. He won't dig, Grant said. Because tomorrow morning, we're going to give him a reason to run. I'm sending Deputy Miller to the hospital. We're going to find a nice little stash of heroin in Brooks' personal bag. Possession with intent to distribute. She goes to prison. The bakery stays seized, and Hunter will be too busy fighting a legal battle to look at us. I froze. They weren't done hurting her. They were going to frame her while she was in a coma. I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I grabbed my keys. Not on my watch, I growled. The engine of my truck roared as I tore out of the motel parking lot. The tires screeched against the asphalt, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the red glow of the neon sign. I had my mission. Grant thought he was playing chess. He thought he could move his pieces, Morgan, the deputies, the legal papers, and I would just sit there, paralyzed by the complexity of it all. He didn't understand that when you back a soldier into a corner, he doesn't play chess. He flips the board. I drove with my lights off as I approached the hospital. It was a tactical habit. The moonlight was enough. The county hospital was quiet, a block of concrete and glass rising out of the flat farmland. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few staff cars and a single sheriff's cruiser parked near the back entrance. Deputy Miller. I parked my truck 2 blocks away in the shadow of an old warehouse and moved on foot. I stayed in the dark spots, moving between the streetlights. My boots made no sound. I wasn't Hunter the brother right now. I was a ghost. I reached the edge of the parking lot and crouched behind a dumpster. I watched the cruiser. The engine was running. I could see the silhouette of a man inside, scrolling on his phone. He looked bored. He was waiting for the shift change, waiting for the hallways to be empty so he could slip into Brooks' room and plant the drugs. I needed to intercept him before he got inside. If those drugs made it into her room, the legal nightmare would never end. Even if I proved it later, the mud would stick. Brooks' reputation would be destroyed. I checked the area. No cameras on this side of the building. Perfect. I picked up a rock and tossed it against a metal sign post about 20 yards to my left. Clang. The deputy's head snapped up. He rolled down his window. Hello. Silence. I waited 10 seconds. Then I threw another one, harder this time. Clang. The door of the cruiser opened. Deputy Miller stepped out. He was a big guy, soft around the middle, resting his hand on his holster. He walked toward the noise, leaving the cruiser door open. Is someone there? He shouted, trying to sound authoritative but just sounding nervous. As soon as he passed my position, I moved. I didn't run. I sprinted, low to the ground. I reached the cruiser in 3 seconds. I leaned into the open door and scanned the front seat. There it was. A brown paper bag sitting on the passenger seat. I grabbed it. It was heavy. I opened it just a crack. Small, clear plastic baggies filled with white powder. Enough to put someone away for 20 years. Hey. I spun around. Miller had turned back. He saw me. He saw the bag in my hand. His eyes went wide. He reached for his gun. Don't do it, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night air like a knife. You pull that weapon, and you won't leave this parking lot walking. He hesitated. He knew who I was. Everyone in town knew who I was. That's evidence, Miller stammered, his hand shaking on his grip. Put it back. This isn't evidence, I said, walking slowly toward him. This is a frame-up, and you're the delivery boy. Sheriff's orders, he said, taking a step back. I don't have a choice, Hunter. You know how he is. If I don't do this, he'll ruin me. I stopped 5 feet from him. I could smell the fierce sweat on him. He's going to ruin you anyway, I said. But tonight, you have a choice. You can try to shoot a Delta operator, or you can get in that car and drive away. Tell him you couldn't get in. Tell him the nurses were watching. Tell him whatever you want. I held up the bag. But this stays with me. Miller looked at me, then at the bag, then at the dark hospital windows. He dropped his hand from his gun. He was a coward, but he wasn't stupid. He's going to kill you, Miller whispered. You don't know what he's building out on the East Road. It's bigger than the bakery. It's bigger than all of us. Let me worry about that, I said. Go. Miller scrambled back to his cruiser, threw it in reverse, and sped off. I stood there in the quiet lot, holding the bag of heroin. I needed to get rid of it, but not yet. Evidence can be a weapon if you aim it in the right direction. I walked to the back of the lot where Grant kept his personal vehicle when he was doing late-night inspections at the hospital. A sleek black SUV. I knew he was inside meeting with the hospital administrator, probably ensuring the medical reports stayed buried. I took out my knife and popped the lock on the SUV's gas cap cover. It wasn't the gas tank I wanted. There was a small gap between the plastic housing and the fender. A perfect hiding spot. I stuffed the bag of drugs into the gap and snapped the cover shut. If Grant wanted a drug bust, he was going to be driving around with one. I made my way back to my truck as the sun started to bleach the sky gray. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline was still pumping. I drove back to the ranch, taking the long way through the woods to make sure I wasn't followed. I parked the truck in the barn and walked toward the main house. I needed to check the bugs I planted. I needed to know what Morgan was doing while her partner in crime was failing. I sat on a hay bale in the loft of the barn, powered up my laptop, and put my headphones back on. The signal from the bug in the kitchen was strong. It was morning now. I heard the clinking of coffee cups. Did Miller do it? Morgan's voice. She sounded impatient. No, Grant's voice. He must have called her or come over. Miller panicked. Said Hunter was there. Said he took the package. He took it. Morgan shrieked. You idiot. Now he has the drugs. He can go to the state police. He won't, Grant said, his voice calm but tight. He can't prove where he got them. It's his word against the deputies. If he walks into a police station with a bag of heroin, we arrest him for possession. I don't like this, Grant, Morgan said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's watching me. At dinner last night. The way he looked at the bracelet. I think he knows about the pearls. The pearls don't matter, Grant snapped. Focus on the land. Is Julian ready to sign the final transfer? He's wavering, Morgan sighed. He keeps saying we should wait until Brooke wakes up. He feels guilty. Fix it, Grant commanded. Use the baby. Tell him the stress is bad for the pregnancy. Guilt him into signing. We need that land legally transferred to the shell company by Friday. The developers are waiting. My blood froze. The baby. Morgan was pregnant? Julian hadn't mentioned that. I'm trying, Morgan said. But Julian he's soft. Not like you. There was a pause. A long, heavy silence. Then the sound of movement. Fabric rustling. Remember who you're doing this for, Grant said. His voice was different now. Softer. Intimate. This deal sets us up for life. No more sneaking around. We take the money, we leave this dust bowl, and we raise that kid right. I ripped the headphones off my ears. I felt sick. The baby wasn't Julian's. Morgan and Grant weren't just conspirators. They were lovers. They were planning to steal the family land, sell it for millions, and run away together with a child that my brother thought was his own. They were going to leave Julian with nothing. No wife, no child, no land, and a sister in a coma. I looked out the barn window at the house. Julian was walking out the back door, carrying a cup of coffee to Morgan on the porch. He kissed her forehead. She smiled up at him. That same fake, poisonous smile. Rage, pure and white-hot, flooded my veins. This wasn't just corruption anymore. This was an annihilation of my family. I grabbed my gear bag. It was time to go on the offensive. The revelation that the baby wasn't Julian's hit me harder than any ID I'd ever encountered. It changed the battlefield completely. This wasn't just about greed or land. It was a deeply personal betrayal that had been rotting the core of my family for months, maybe years. Julian was living a lie, protecting a woman who was planning to destroy him. I needed to extract Julian from that house, but I couldn't just tell him. He was in love. He was blind. If I walked up to him and said, "Your wife is pregnant with the sheriff's baby," he'd punch me. He'd kick me off the ranch, and I'd lose my only access to the enemy. I had to show him. But first, I had to survive the next 24 hours. Grant knew I had the drugs. He knew I was a threat. He wouldn't wait for Friday. He was going to strike now. I spent the morning in the barn, fortifying my position. I wasn't going to be caught sleeping. I set up tripwires at the two main entrances using fishing line and empty soda cans. Crude, but effective noise traps. I cleaned my sidearm, a SIG P226, and loaded 3 spare magazines. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Hunter, a female voice said. It was sharp, professional, and familiar. Ivy, I said, exhaling. I was hoping you'd pick up. Ivy was a federal prosecutor based in the state capital. We had crossed paths years ago during a joint task force operation where my unit provided security for her team against a cartel. She was tough as nails and hated corrupt cops more than anything. I got your encrypted message, she said. The audio file you sent, the quality is rough, but it's damning. Conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering. But it's not enough for an indictment yet. It's circumstantial. He beat my sister, Ivy, I said, pacing the barn floor. He's trying to frame her. I know, she said, her voice softening. But without a witness or physical proof linking him to the assault, he'll walk. He owns the local judge, Hunter. We need something undeniable. We need the money trail. Morgan mentioned a shell company, I said, remembering the conversation from the wiretap. She said they need the land transferred by Friday. Find the name of that company, Ivy commanded. If I can link the shell company to Grant's personal accounts, I can bring in the FBI for wire fraud. Then we have him. I'm on it, I said. But Ivy, watch your back. This guy is desperate. You too, soldier. Don't start a war you can't finish legally. I hung up. Find the name of the company. I knew exactly where it would be. In Morgan's home office. I waited until 2 p.m. I watched from the barn loft as Morgan's white Range Rover pulled out of the driveway. She was heading into town, probably to meet Grant. Julian was out in the north pasture fixing fences. I could see his truck a mile away on the hill. The house was empty. I moved. I slipped through the back door of the main house. It was unlocked. Country living habits that hadn't died yet. The house was quiet. I went straight to the spare room Morgan used as an office. It was pristine, decorated in white and beige. I went to the desk. Locked. I pulled a tension wrench and a pick from my pocket. Click. Click. The drawer slid open. Inside, there were stacks of papers. Wedding planning binders, receipts, and a red folder hidden under a stack of magazines. I opened it. Vanguard Development, LLC. There were incorporation papers, bank transfer slips, and the deed transfer document for Brooks Bakery. And there, listed as the registered agent for the LLC, wasn't Grant. It wasn't Morgan. It was Julian Vance. I stared at the paper. They had set up the shell company in my brother's name. If this deal went south, if the feds investigated, Grant wouldn't go to jail. Morgan wouldn't go to jail. Julian would. He was the fall guy. They were going to steal the money and leave him holding the bag for massive real estate fraud. My hands shook. The cruelty was bottomless. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every document. I sent them to Ivy immediately. Ping. A text from Ivy. Got them. Running the trace now. Give me 2 hours. I put everything back exactly as I found it and locked the drawer. I turned to leave, but as I passed the window, I saw dust kicking up on the long driveway. 3 sheriff's cruisers. No sirens. No lights. Just speed. They were coming fast. I checked my watch. 2:45 p.m. I wasn't supposed to be here. If they found me in the house, it was burglary. If they found me in the barn, well, they weren't coming to talk. I sprinted out the back door and ran for the tree line that bordered the property. The woods were dense, providing good cover. I made it to the edge of the trees just as the cruisers skidded to a halt in front of the barn. I crouched behind a thick oak tree and watched. Sheriff Grant stepped out of the lead car. He was wearing a tactical vest now, carrying an AR-15. He didn't look like a peace officer. He looked like a death squad leader. Check the barn, he shouted to his deputies. He's in there. I want him flushed out. They moved with weapons drawn. They kicked open the barn door. Bang. One of my noise traps went off. A soda can filled with rocks falling onto a sheet of metal. The deputies opened fire. They didn't shout freeze or show me your hands. They just unleashed hell into the dark barn. Wood splintered. Hay bales exploded. They were trying to execute me. I filmed it all on my phone from the tree line. This wasn't an arrest attempt. It was an assassination. After a minute of shooting, silence fell. Clear, a deputy shouted. He's not here, Sheriff. Grant walked into the barn, kicking at the debris. He came out a moment later, his face red with fury. He scanned the property. He scanned the tree line. For a second, his eyes seemed to lock right on my position. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I was part of the forest. Find him, Grant spat. Search the woods. Search the creek. If he's on this property, I want him in a body bag. They started moving toward the trees. I had to move. I couldn't fight 4 armed men in the daylight without collateral damage. I needed to draw them away from the ranch, away from Julian. I slipped deeper into the woods, moving fast and silent. I circled around toward the old logging road that led to the highway. My truck was still in the barn. I couldn't get to it. I was on foot. I reached the road just as a beat-up pickup truck was driving by. It was old Mr. Henderson, a neighbor who had hated the sheriff for years. I stepped out of the woods. Mr. Henderson slammed on his brakes. "Hunter," he said, eyes wide. "What the hell is going on?" I heard shooting. "I need a ride, Mr. Henderson," I said, jumping into the passenger seat. "And I need you to drive fast." "Where to?" he asked, throwing the truck into gear without hesitation. "The radio station," I said. Mr. Henderson looked at me like I was crazy. "The radio station? You want to request a song?" "No," I said, looking back at the rising dust cloud of the sheriff's cruisers turning around to pursue us. "I want to make a broadcast." I looked at the phone in my hand. I had the audio of Morgan and Grant. I had the video of the shooting. It was time to take this war to the airwaves. Mr. Henderson's old Ford rattled as he pushed it to 70 miles an hour down the back roads. The suspension groaned with every pothole, but the engine held strong. In the rearview mirror, I could see the distinct shape of a sheriff's SUV cresting the hill behind us. They were closing the distance. "They're gaining on us, Hunter," Henderson shouted over the roar of the wind. "I can't outrun a modern interceptor in this rust bucket." "We don't need to outrun them," I said, my eyes scanning the road ahead. "We just need to break line of sight. Take the next left onto the old quarry road. That road's a dead end. Just do it." Henderson yanked the wheel. The truck fishtailed onto the gravel track, kicking up a massive cloud of white dust. It was a smokescreen. For a few seconds, the deputy behind us would be driving blind. "Stop here," I yelled as we passed a cluster of heavy boulders. Henderson slammed on the brakes. I jumped out. "Keep driving to the end of the road, then hide the truck in the brush," I instructed. "Wait for me." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to slow them down." I grabbed a heavy, rusted chain that was lying near the old quarry gate, leftover junk from years ago. I wrapped one end around a sturdy pine tree and pulled the chain across the road, burying it slightly in the loose gravel. It wasn't tight, it was slack. I held the other end and crouched behind a boulder. The sheriff's SUV roared out of the dust cloud. The deputy was driving aggressive, angry. As the front bumper passed the tree line, I yanked the chain tight with all my strength. Crunch. The chain caught the front axle. The SUV jerked violently, the front end slamming into the gravel. The momentum snapped the tie rod. The vehicle slewed sideways, skidding into the ditch with a sickening metal screech. Steam hissed from the radiator. It wasn't lethal, but that car wasn't moving anywhere. I didn't wait to check on the driver. I sprinted down the road to where Henderson was waiting. "Let's go," I said, jumping back in. To the radio station. We hit the main highway. The local radio station, K-Town 98.9, sat on a hill overlooking the valley. It was a small operation, mostly playing country hits and local farm reports, but it had a powerful transmitter. It reached 3 counties. We pulled up to the station. The parking lot was empty except for the DJ's car. I ran inside. The receptionist, a high school girl chewing gum, looked up. Can I help? Emergency broadcast, I said, flashing an old military ID card that meant nothing but looked official. I pushed past her into the booth. The DJ, a guy named Big Al, was live on air. He froze as I walked in, headphones around his neck. Hey, we're live. Al protested. I know, I said. I locked the door behind me. I pulled out my phone and an auxiliary cable I kept in my gear bag. Plug this in. I can't just plug it in. Al saw the look in my eyes. He plugged the cable into the mixing board. I leaned into the microphone. Citizens of Oak Haven, I said. My voice was calm, steady. This is Hunter Vance. You know my family. You know my sister, Brooke. I paused. I could imagine people in their cars, in their kitchens, stopping to listen. You've been told she fell. You've been told it was an accident. You've been told lies. I hit play on my phone. The sound of Morgan's voice filled the airwaves, clear and undeniable. He took the package? You idiot. Now he has the drugs. He can go to the state police. Then Grant's voice. He won't. We're going to find a nice little stash of heroin in Brooke's personal bag. Possession with intent to distribute. I let the recording play to the part about the land seizure. We need that land legally transferred. The developers are waiting. I stopped the recording. Sheriff Grant isn't protecting you. I said into the mic, he's selling you out. He beat a woman to steal her land. He's framing innocent people to cover his tracks. And he's doing it with help from inside my own family. I looked out the window of the booth. I could see cars pulling over on the highway below. The town was listening. Grant, I said, addressing the villain directly now. I know you're listening. The feds have the documents. The town has the truth. You can send your deputies. You can send your hit squad. But it's over. The only way you leave this town is in handcuffs or a box. Your choice. I cut the feed. You can't say that, Big Al whispered, his face pale. I just did, I said. I grabbed my gear. Thanks for the airtime, Al. I ran out to Henderson's truck. Did you hear it? I asked. Everyone heard it, son, Henderson said, grinning a toothless grin. My phone is blowing up. People are mad. Real mad. Good, I said. Now take me to the hospital. We need to get Brooke out of there before Grant decides to silence the only witness left. We drove back toward town. The atmosphere had changed. People were standing on their porches. I saw a group of men gathering outside the hardware store. The fear was breaking. The anger was rising. But Grant wouldn't go down easy. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. As we approached the hospital, my phone buzzed. It was Ivy. Hunter, get out of there. The judge just issued a warrant for your arrest. Domestic terrorism. They're calling the radio stunt a hijacking. State troopers are en route. Let them come, I said. I'm getting my sister. I hung up. We pulled into the hospital loading dock. I didn't go through the front. I went through the kitchen entrance. I knew the layout. I moved through the corridors, dodging staff. I reached the ICU. Brooke's room was guarded, but not by a deputy. Standing in front of her door was Julian, my brother. He was holding a shotgun. He looked pale, sweaty, and terrified. Julian, I said, stepping into the hallway. He raised the shotgun. His hands were shaking violently. Stay back, Hunter, he cried out. Morgan called me. She said you've lost your mind. She said you threatened to kill her and the baby. She said you made up those tapes. Julian, listen to me, I said, keeping my hands visible. The tapes are real. Morgan is playing you. The baby isn't yours. Liar, Julian screamed. He pumped the shotgun. CHCHK. She loves me. She's trying to save this farm. She's trying to frame you. I shouted back. The shell company is in your name, Julian. Look at the papers. If she sells the land, you go to prison for fraud, and she runs away with Grant. Julian hesitated. Confusion warred with loyalty in his eyes. Why would she do that? He whispered. Why? Because Grant is the father, Julian, I said, my voice soft now. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. Julian lowered the gun slightly. He looked at the door behind him where his sister lay broken. Prove it, he choked out. I will, I said. But first, we have to get Brooke out. Grant is coming to kill her. Suddenly, the elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open. Sheriff Grant stepped out. He wasn't alone. He had 4 deputies with him, all in tactical gear. They raised their rifles. "Drop the gun, Julian," Grant roared. "Hunter is a fugitive. Step away from him." Julian looked at Grant. Then he looked at me. He looked at Grant's hand, at the silver ring. Then he looked at the door to Brooke's room. Julian turned his shotgun toward Grant. "You hurt my sister," Julian said, his voice finding a sudden, terrible strength. "Julian, don't be stupid," Grant warned, raising his AR-15. "Get her out, Hunter," Julian said to me, without looking back. "Get her out now." "Julian, no, go." I kicked open the door to Brooke's room. I unlocked the wheels of her bed. Gunfire erupted in the hallway. The sound of gunfire in a confined space is deafening. It rattles your teeth. As the first shots rang out in the hallway, I didn't look back. I couldn't. Julian had made his choice. He was buying me time with his life, and I wasn't going to waste a single second of it. I didn't roll the bed out. It was too slow, too wide. I ripped the 4 lines out of Brooke's arm, applying pressure to the bleed with a piece of gauze. I scooped her up in my arms. She was terrifyingly light, like a bird with hollow bones. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open, filled with haze and pain. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you." I kicked the latch on the emergency exit door. It swung open into the cool night air of the loading dock. Mr. Henderson was there, the engine of his beat-up Ford idling loud and rough. He saw me carrying Brooke and jumped out to lower the tailgate. "Get in the back," I shouted. "Stay low." I laid Brooke on a pile of old blankets in the bed of the truck and covered her with a tarp. I vaulted in beside her. Henderson floored it. As we screeched out of the parking lot, I heard the sirens. A dozen of them. Blue and red lights washed over the brick walls of the hospital, but they were swarming the front entrance. They didn't see the rusted truck slipping away into the dark. We drove in silence for 20 minutes. I held Brooke's hand, checking her pulse every 30 seconds. It was weak, but steady. "Where are we going?" Henderson yelled through the sliding rear window. "The old mill," I said. "Up on Shadow Ridge. No one goes there anymore." It was a dilapidated structure from the 1950s, hidden deep in the forest. No electricity, no cameras, no neighbors. Perfect. We carried Brooke inside and laid her on a dusty workbench I cleared off. I used the medical kit from my bag to clean her wounds and set up a portable 4-drip I'd swiped from the ambulance bay on my way out. Once she was stable, the adrenaline crashed. My hands started to shake. I sat on the floor, leaning against a rusted saw blade, and put my head in my hands. Julian. I had left my brother behind. I didn't know if he was dead or alive. The last image I had was him standing tall, shotgun raised, facing down a firing squad to save the sister he thought he'd failed. My phone buzzed. A secure message from Ivy. "Scanner traffic says suspect in custody. 1 officer wounded. Suspect sustained minor injuries. They're taking him to the county jail, Hunter. Not the hospital. They're going to break him. He was alive. Thank God. But he was in the belly of the beast. What about the file?" I typed back. "I need the nail in the coffin, Ivy. Now." "I found it," she replied. "And Hunter, you're not going to believe this. It's worse than land fraud. Send it." A minute later, a PDF loaded on my screen. It was a collection of recovered emails and a private medical invoice from a clinic in the city dated 4 months ago. I started reading, and then I stopped. I felt the bile rise in my throat. The invoice was for a prenatal paternity test. Non-invasive. High-end. Paid for by a personal check from Grant Wilson. The patient was Morgan Vance. I looked at the results attached to the email chain. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Father, Grant Wilson. I stared at the glowing screen in the darkness of the mill. The baby Julian was so excited about. The baby he was working himself to death to provide for. The baby he was protecting when he defended Morgan. It wasn't his. It was Grant's. And the dates. I did the math. This wasn't a one-time mistake. The emails went back 3 years. He's clueless, Grant. He just signed the loan papers. We'll have the cash soon. Sent by Morgan, 2 years ago. Make sure the sister stays busy. I don't want her looking at the books. Sent by Grant, last year. It was an affair. A long, coordinated, romantic affair. They had been sleeping together while Julian was out fixing fences. They had been laughing at him. They were stealing the family legacy not just for money, but to start a new life together, funded by the destruction of the Vance family. Julian was just a pawn, a temporary husband until they could cash out. I looked over at Brooke, sleeping fitfully on the workbench. She must have found out. That's why they hurt her. She wasn't just in the way of the land deal. She was in the way of the secret. I stood up and walked to the window. The moon was high. I needed Julian to know. If he knew, he would turn. If he knew, he would burn the whole station down from the inside. But he was in a cell, likely stripped of his phone. How do you reach a man in solitary confinement? You don't. You reach the person who thinks they've won. I took a screenshot of the paternity test. I took a screenshot of the email where Morgan called Julian clueless. I opened a messaging app. I typed in Julian's number. I knew the deputies would have his phone. I knew Grant would probably be the one looking at it, checking for my location. But I also knew Morgan. She was possessive. She would be holding on to Julian's personal effects, pretending to be the grieving wife waiting for her husband's release. I sent the images to Julian's phone. And then I sent a text. He died protecting you tonight. But you're pregnant with the man who tried to kill him. Does Julian know he's raising the sheriff's bastard? I watched the status. Delivered. Read. 10 miles away, in the waiting room of the county jail, I imagined Morgan's face. I imagined the color draining from her skin. But I wasn't done. I forwarded the same file to Deputy Miller, the coward I had cornered in the parking lot. You want a way out, Miller? I typed. Show this to Julian in his cell. If you don't, I leak it to the press tomorrow, and you go down as an accomplice to a sex scandal and fraud ring. It was a long shot. Relying on a coward to be brave is risky. But Miller hated Grant. I saw it in his eyes. He was scared, and fear makes people do desperate things to save themselves. I sat back down next to Brooke. Rest up, sis, I whispered. Tomorrow, we stop running. Tomorrow, we go hunting. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The war had shifted. It wasn't about land anymore. It was about blood, and Grant had spilled the wrong kind. The sun rose over the dilapidated mill, casting long, sharp shadows through the slats in the wooden walls. Brooke was awake. She couldn't speak. Her jaw was wired tight, but her eyes were clear. She watched me clean my weapon, her gaze filled with a terrifying mix of fear and gratitude. She reached out and squeezed my hand. It was the only communication we needed. My phone remained silent. I hadn't heard from Ivy. I hadn't heard from Miller. The silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. I have to go back, I told Brooke, gently placing the blanket over her shoulders. I have to get Julian. She shook her head violently, gripping my wrist. She made a guttural sound of protest. I'm not leaving you alone, I said. Mr. Henderson is staying right here with his shotgun. But Julian is in a cage with a monster. If I don't get him out now, he won't survive the night. I left before she could stop me. I drove Henderson's truck to the edge of town and parked it deep in the brush. I moved on foot towards the station. The town felt different today. It was quiet. Too quiet. Storefronts were closed. People were staying inside. They sensed the storm. I didn't go to the station. I went to the diner across the street. I climbed the fire escape to the roof and set up a position behind the HVAC unit. From here, I had a clear line of sight into the sheriff's office windows and the holding cell intake area. I peered through my binoculars. What I saw made my blood boil. Grant was in his office. He wasn't working. He was pacing. He looked frantic. He was shouting at someone on the phone. Morgan was there too, sitting in the corner chair, her face buried in her hands. She looked small, defeated. My text message had landed. But where was Julian? I scanned the lower windows. The cells were in the basement level, visible through narrow, barred windows at street level. I saw movement in cell number 4. I focused the lens. Julian was sitting on a metal cot. His face was swollen. One eye was shut. His shirt was torn. They had worked him over. Then, the cell door opened. Deputy Miller walked in. I held my breath. This was the moment. Miller looked nervous. He kept glancing at the door. He wasn't carrying a baton or food. He was holding a phone. He showed the screen to Julian. I watched through the binoculars as my brother's good eye widened. He stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't blink. Then, slowly, he looked up at Miller. He asked a question. Miller nodded. Julian stood up. He didn't look like a beaten man anymore. He walked to the bars of the window and gripped them until his knuckles turned white. He screamed something. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the raw, primal energy of it. It was a scream of pure betrayal. Miller quickly left the cell and locked it. I had my confirmation. The seed was planted. The dragon was awake. Now I had to open the cage. I climbed down from the roof. A frontal assault on a fortified police station was suicide. I needed a distraction. I needed chaos. I walked to the public library 2 blocks away. I logged onto a computer using a guest pass. I accessed the county's municipal grid controls, a system I knew was painfully outdated because I had dated the city planner's daughter in high school. The passwords hadn't changed in 10 years. I located the water main controls for Main Street. Specifically, the valve junction directly under the sheriff's station parking lot. I initiated a pressure surge test. 150 psi. Enter. I walked out of the library and leaned against a lamppost, checking my watch. 3 minutes later, the ground shook. Boom. A geyser of water erupted in the sheriff's parking lot, shattering the asphalt and shooting 30 feet into the air. It was spectacular. Mud and water sprayed everywhere, flooding the street instantly. The alarms in the station started blaring. Deputies ran out, shouting, confused. It looked like a bomb had gone off. Water main break, someone yelled. It's flooding the basement. Move the prisoners. That was the play. They had to move the prisoners to the upper holding area or transport them to the state facility. Either way, Julian would be brought out of the cell. I moved into the chaos. I pulled the hood of my jacket up. In the spray of water and the panic, nobody looked twice at another bystander. I saw them bring Julian out the side door. He was cuffed, shackled at the ankles. 2 deputies were guiding him toward a transport van. Grant came out behind them, shouting orders. Get him to state. Now, Grant yelled. He looked terrified. He knew if the flooding brought in the fire department or city workers, he would lose control of the secure environment he needed to silence Julian. I was 20 feet away, hidden behind a parked car. I drew my weapon. Not to shoot, to initiate the rescue. But before I could move, Julian stopped walking. He planted his feet in the mud. The deputies tried to shove him, but he was a big man, farm strong. He wouldn't budge. Grant, Julian roared. His voice cut through the sound of the rushing water. Sheriff Grant stopped and turned around. Get in the van, Vance. Is it yours? Julian screamed. Is the baby yours? The entire street went silent. The deputies stopped pushing. The few townspeople watching from the sidewalk froze. Grant's face turned a color I had never seen before. A mix of purple rage and white fear. Get him in the van. Grant screeched, reaching for his own gun. He's delirious. Move him. Morgan told me. Julian lied. It was a brilliant bluff. She told me everything. She showed me the tests. You touched my wife. You stole my life. Julian head-butted the deputy to his right. Crack. The deputy went down. The second deputy hesitated. He had heard the accusation. He looked at Grant. He didn't want to protect a man who slept with his prisoner's wife. That hesitation was all I needed. I stepped out from behind the car. Let him go, I said calmly, raising my cig. Grant spun around. He saw me. Shoot him. Grant ordered his men. Shoot the terrorist. Nobody fired. The deputies looked at Julian, bleeding and screaming the truth. They looked at Grant, the adulterer and thief. They looked at me, the Delta operator who had exposed it all. Put the guns down, boys, I said. This isn't your fight. This is between me my brother, and the man who betrayed us all. Deputy Miller, standing by the van, was the first one. He slowly unholstered his weapon and laid it on the wet pavement. "I'm done, Sheriff," Miller said. One by one, the other two deputies lowered their rifles. Grant stood alone. He looked around wildly. He realized his power was evaporating like mist. He looked at Julian. He looked at me. And then he did the only thing a coward like him could do. He grabbed Morgan, who had just run out the side door to see what was happening. He grabbed her by the hair and pulled her in front of him as a human shield. He jammed his pistol against her temple. "Back off," Grant screamed, his eyes manic. "I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll kill her." Julian froze. Even after everything, seeing the mother of the child, even if it wasn't his, with a gun to her head paralyzed him. "You really are a piece of trash, Grant," I said, keeping my aim steady on his exposed forehead. "Hiding behind the woman you're supposed to love." "I need a car," Grant yelled. "I need a clear path out of town, or her brains are going on the sidewalk." Morgan was sobbing, her hands clutching her stomach. "Grant, please. The baby." "Shut up." Grant slammed the gun harder against her head. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Real sirens. State troopers. Ivy had come through. "It's over, Grant," I said. "Look around. You have nowhere to go." "I have a hostage," he shrieked. I looked at Julian. I gave him a subtle nod. A tactical signal we used to use when we were kids playing war in the barn. "Go low." Julian saw it. He dropped to his knees in the mud, pulling the heavy ankle chains taut. I fired. Not at Grant's head. At his shoulder. Bang. Grant screamed and spun around, the impact spinning him away from Morgan. Julian, from his knees, lunged forward and tackled Grant's legs. They both went down in the mud. The gun skittered away. I holstered my weapon and walked forward. It was time to finish this. The mud was slick with water and blood. Julian, shackled at the ankles but fueled by a rage that had been building for years, was on top of Grant. He wasn't hitting him with technique. He was hitting him with the raw, clumsy force of a brother betrayed. "You touched her," Julian screamed, landing a heavy blow to Grant's jaw. "You touched my family." Grant, despite the bullet wound in his shoulder, was fighting back like a cornered rat. He gouged at Julian's eyes, kicking wildly. He was bigger, heavier, and desperate. I stepped in. I didn't want Julian to kill him. Not here. Not like this. That was too easy. I grabbed Julian by the back of his shirt and hauled him off. "Enough. He's done. Let me kill him." Julian roared, straining against my grip, tears streaming down his mud-caked face. "Not today," I said, shoving Julian toward Deputy Miller, who was standing frozen by the van. "Get the keys. Get those cuffs off him. Now." Miller scrambled to obey, his hands shaking as he unlocked Julian's shackles. Grant was writhing in the mud, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked up at me, his eyes full of hate. "You're dead, Vance. You assaulted an officer. You shot a sheriff." "I shot a kidnapper," I said coldly. I looked at Morgan. She was sitting on the wet pavement, gasping for air, holding her stomach. She looked at Grant with horror. The man she had conspired with, the man she had betrayed her husband for, had just used her as a human shield. The fantasy was shattered. "Hunter," she whispered, reaching a hand out to me. "He made me." I didn't let her finish. I didn't help her up. "Save it for the judge, Morgan." Just then, the wail of sirens became deafening. The state troopers were turning the corner onto Main Street. A dozen cruisers, black and gold, swarmed the block. "Hunter." Ivy's voice rang out. She jumped out of the lead car, flanked by federal agents in windbreakers. She looked at the scene, the water geyser, the blood, the cuffed sheriff rolling in the mud. "You really know how to make a scene," she said, running over to us. "He tried to kill my brother," I said, pointing at Grant. "And he held her hostage." The agents moved in, guns drawn. But they didn't aim at Grant. They aimed at us. "Drop the weapon, Hunter," a lead agent shouted. "Hands in the air." "What is this?" I asked Ivy, keeping my hands visible. "It's complicated," Ivy said, stepping between me and the agents. The governor wants this handled by the book. You shot a law enforcement officer, Hunter. Even if he's dirty, they have to take you in until we sort out the jurisdiction. I'm not going in, I said. If I go in, Grant's cronies in the system will bury me before trial. I can't stop them, Ivy said, her eyes pleading. Just surrender. I'll get you out in 24 hours. I looked at Julian. He was free of the cuffs, rubbing his wrists. He looked broken, staring at Morgan. I looked at Grant. The paramedics were already working on him. He was smiling again. A weak, bloody smile. He knew the system. He knew that once the lawyers got involved, he could spin this. He could claim self-defense. He could claim I was a terrorist. I couldn't let that happen. Julian, I said softly, can you drive? Julian looked up. He saw the look in my eyes. Yeah. Take the truck. Go to the mill. Watch over Brooke. What about you? I'm going to finish the parade. I turned to the agent. I'm not surrendering. I reached into my pocket. The agents tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. I pulled out the flashbang grenade I had swiped from my tactical bag earlier. Close your eyes, I shouted to Julian. I pulled the pin and dropped it at my feet. Bang! The world turned white. A deafening ringing filled the air. In the confusion, I moved. I didn't run away. I ran toward Grant. The paramedics were blinded, stumbling back. I grabbed Grant by his tactical vest and hauled him up. He screamed in pain as his shoulder jarred. We're going for a walk, I growled in his ear. I dragged him toward the sheriff's SUV, the one with the keys still in the ignition. I shoved him into the passenger seat and zip-tied his good hand to the door handle. I jumped into the driver's seat. The smoke was clearing. The agents were shouting, recovering their vision. Bullets started pinging off the back of the SUV. I slammed it into gear and roared away, tires spinning on the wet asphalt. You're insane, Grant screamed, pressing his hand to his wound. You can't kidnap a sheriff. They'll send the National Guard. They can send the whole damn army, I said, swerving around a blockade. But they won't get here before we reach the ranch. Why the ranch? Grant spat. What are you going to do? I'm taking you to the scene of the crime, I said, and I'm going to make you confess. On camera. To the whole world. I grabbed the CB radio mic from the dashboard. Attention all units, I said, my voice calm over the police frequency. This is Hunter Vance. I have Sheriff Grant. We are heading to the Vance Ranch. If any unit attempts to intercept, I will release the full unedited audio of Grant admitting to the murder of the previous sheriff 5 years ago. I didn't have that audio. It was a bluff. But Grant went pale. You don't know about that, he whispered. I know everything, Grant, I lied. I know about the bodies in the marsh. I know about the bribes. And now, I'm going to make sure everyone else knows. We hit the dirt road leading to the ranch. Dust billowed behind us. But Grant wasn't done. He started laughing. A manic, desperate laugh. You think you've won? He wheezed. You think taking me to the ranch scares me? You fool. He looked at me with dead eyes. The ranch is rigged, Hunter. I slammed on the brakes, sliding to a halt a mile from the house. What did you say? I knew you'd come back, Grant sneered. I had Miller plant incendiary devices in the barn and the main house yesterday, rigged to a remote trigger. He nodded at a small black fob on his keychain, hanging from the ignition. One press, Grant whispered. And your legacy burns to ash. Your parents' home. Your sister's cottage. All of it. I stared at the fob. You're lying. Try me, Grant said. Drive closer. See what happens. I looked at the ranch house in the distance. It stood tall and proud against the setting sun. It was everything my father had built. You have a choice, hero, Grant said. You can take me to jail and let me call my lawyers. Or you can watch your history burn. I looked at Grant. Then I looked at the house. Burn it, I said. Grant's smile faltered. What? I said burn it. I grabbed the keys from the ignition. I ripped the fob off the ring. You think I care about wood and brick? I asked, holding the fob up. My family is safe. Brooke is safe. Julian is safe. This house. It's just a building. But you? You're the rot. I opened the window and threw the fob into the tall grass field. No, Grant screamed. I hit the gas. We sped toward the ranch. As we approached the driveway, I saw them. The townspeople. Dozens of trucks. Hundreds of people. They were lined up along the fences of the ranch. They hadn't come to arrest me. They had come to watch. They had heard the broadcast. They had seen the truth. They were holding signs. Justice for Brooke. No more corruption. They had formed a human wall around the property. I slowed the SUV to a crawl. Look at them, Grant, I said. That's not a mob. That's a jury. Grant shrank down in his seat. He was terrified of the people he had oppressed for decades. I parked the SUV in the center of the crowd. I got out and walked around to the passenger side. I cut the zip tie holding Grant to the door. I hauled him out. He stumbled, weak and bloody. The crowd went silent. This man, I shouted, my voice echoing across the field, tried to burn us down. He stole from you. He hurt my sister. And he betrayed the badge he wears. Guilty, someone shouted from the crowd. Guilty, the crowd roared back. Grant looked around, trembling. Hunter, please, he begged, gripping my arm. Don't let them take me. Don't let them tear me apart. They're not going to touch you, I said softly. I pulled a pair of heavy iron chains from the bed of my truck, the same chains used for hauling logs. I clamped one end around Grant's waist. What are you doing? He stammered. You like parades, Sheriff? I asked, locking the padlock. You always led the Founders' Day parade, right? Sitting in your convertible, waving at the peasants. I tied the other end of the chain to the trailer hitch of the SUV. Today, you're the Grand Marshal. I wasn't going to drag him to death. I gave him enough slack to walk, but he was going to walk behind the car, chained like a prisoner, all the way back to town. Walk, I commanded. I got in the SUV and put it in drive. I crept forward at 3 miles per hour. The chain went taut. Grant stumbled, then caught his footing. He had to walk. He had to march. And as we moved, the crowd followed. A silent, angry procession. We were dragging the corruption out of Oakhaven, one step at a time. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The only light came from the headlights of the procession behind us, a river of steel and righteous anger flowing down the main highway. Sheriff Grant stumbled behind the SUV. His boots scuffed against the asphalt. He was exhausted, humiliated, and broken. Every few hundred yards, he would trip, the chain would jerk tight, and he would scramble to his feet to avoid being dragged. He wasn't the untouchable king of Oakhaven anymore. He was just a man in a dirty uniform, tethered to the consequences of his own greed. I watched him in the rearview mirror. I felt no pity, only a cold, hard satisfaction. This was the walk he forced Brooke to take emotionally for months. Now he was taking it physically. We reached the outskirts of town. The reception was deafening. People lined the sidewalks, not cheering, but watching, witnesses to the fall of a tyrant. But as we approached the town square, my tactical sense started screaming. The procession behind us slowed. The crowd was thinning out. I looked ahead. A barricade had been set up across Main Street. Armored vehicles, spotlights, men in black tactical gear with FBI emblazoned on their chests. Ivy stood in front of the barricade, holding a megaphone. Hunter, her voice boomed, distorted by the amplification. Stop the vehicle. You have made your point. Do not force us to engage. I hit the brakes. The SUV idled in the middle of the road. Grant collapsed onto the pavement behind me, gasping for air, weeping openly. I stepped out of the vehicle. I didn't raise my hands. I stood tall. He's all yours, Ivy, I shouted. I'm returning the trash. Step away from the vehicle, an agent yelled, training a sniper rifle on my chest. Let him walk, a voice shouted from the sidewalk. It was Mr. Henderson. He did what you feds were too scared to do. Let him go. Let him go. The crowd began to chant. Ivy lowered the megaphone and walked toward me, unarmed. The agents tensed, but held their fire. Hunter, she said when she was close enough to whisper. You need to surrender. If you walk away now, it's a fugitive warrant. If you stay, we can argue mitigating circumstances. You exposed a corruption ring. I'm not looking for a plea deal, Ivy, I said. I'm looking for closure. You got it, she said, gesturing to Grant, who was now being swarmed by medics and agents, clicked into handcuffs. He's going away for life. RICO charges. Kidnapping. Attempted murder. I'll make sure he never sees the sun again. I looked at Grant one last time. He was looking at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. And Morgan? I asked. In custody, Ivy confirmed. She turned state's evidence 10 minutes ago. She's singing like a canary to save herself. She admitted to the forgery, the affair, everything. Good, I said. I looked at the line of agents. I knew I couldn't fight the FBI. My war was with Grant, and I had won. I slowly unbuckled my tactical belt. I laid my sidearm on the hood of the SUV. I put my hands behind my head and knelt on the asphalt. Do it, I said. 2 agents moved in, cuffing me. They weren't rough. There was a respect in their grip. They knew what I was. They knew why I did it. As they led me toward the armored truck, I saw Julian pushing through the crowd. He was limping, supported by Mr. Henderson. Hunter, he yelled. Hunter. I stopped. The agents paused. Take care of Brooke, I called out to him. Rebuild the ranch. It's yours now. Truly yours. Julian nodded, tears streaming down his face. I will. I promise. They put me in the back of the van. The doors slammed shut. Darkness swallowed me. But for the first time in months, I felt light. 2 days later, federal holding facility, the interrogation room, was cold. A single mirror on the wall. A steel table bolted to the floor. I had been sitting there for an hour. The door opened. Ivy walked in, carrying a thick file. She looked tired. She sat down across from me and slapped the file on the table. You're a lucky son of a bitch, Vance, she said, suppressing a smile. I make my own luck, I said. The governor pardoned you, she said. I blinked. What? Technically, it's a commuted sentence with time served, pending a probationary period, she explained, opening the file. The public outcry was massive. The video of you dragging Grant through town went viral. Millions of views. People are calling you a hero. The governor can't afford to put a decorated veteran in prison for taking down a corrupt sheriff who was literally stealing babies. She slid a paper toward me. Sign here. You lose your gun permit for a year. You have to attend anger management. And you can't leave the state without permission. I looked at the paper. It was freedom. I signed it. One more thing, Ivy said, her face growing serious. Grant wants to see you. Why? He's in the infirmary wing. The doctors say his shoulder is infected. He's septic. He might not make it through the week. He requested a clergy member. And you. I stood up. Let's go. We walked through the sterile corridors of the prison hospital. Grant was in a secure room, handcuffed to the bed. He looked terrible. Pale, sweating, wires hooked up to his chest. He opened his eyes when I walked in. Hunter, he wheezed. Grant, I said, standing at the foot of the bed. You think you won, he whispered, a ghostly smile touching his lips. But you didn't save everyone. What are you talking about? The developer, Grant rasped. Vanguard Development. I wasn't the head. I was just the local muscle. My stomach tightened. Who runs it? I demanded. Who was buying the land? Grant chuckled, which turned into a coughing fit. Someone bigger than me. Someone who doesn't like losing money. I sent a message before you caught me. What message? I stepped closer, ignoring the guard's warning. I told them the deal was off because of you, Grant said, his eyes gleaming with malice. I told them, you were the problem. Who are they, Grant? I grabbed the bed rail. The cartel, he whispered. Sinaloa. The room went cold. You were laundering money for the cartel through my sister's bakery? Why do you think the land was worth so much? Grant smiled, revealing blood-stained teeth. It wasn't for a highway. It was for a distribution hub. He leaned back, closing his eyes. They're coming, Hunter. Not the police. Not the lawyers. The Reapers. I looked at Ivy. Her face was pale. Is he lying? I asked. We found irregularities in the shell company's funding, she admitted softly. Offshore accounts. Crypto transfers. It fits the profile. I looked back at Grant. Let them come, I said. I was getting bored anyway. I turned and walked out of the room. 1 week later, I stood on the porch of the ranch house. The sun was rising. The air was crisp. Brooke was sitting in the rocking chair next to me. Her wires were off. She was healing. The bruises were fading to yellow. Julian was in the driveway, loading tools into his truck. He looked lighter. He had filed for divorce. Morgan was gone, awaiting trial in a federal facility. The baby, that was a bridge we hadn't crossed yet. But Julian was free. Hunter, Brooke said. Her voice was raspy, but it was hers. Yes, sis. Are you staying? I looked out at the horizon. I thought about Grant's warning. I thought about the black sedans that might be coming down that road one day. I couldn't leave. Not now. I had kicked a hornet's nest that stretched all the way to Mexico. I'm staying, I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. We have a lot of work to do. We need to fix the barn. We need to expand the bakery. I looked at the perimeter of the property. I visualized the security cameras, the reinforced gates, the motion sensors I was going to install. And I need to get ready, I added quietly. Brooke looked at me. She saw the soldier in my eyes. She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded. Okay, she said. Welcome home. I watched a hawk circle high above the field. It was hunting. So was I? The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley as the procession moved toward the town limits. I drove the SUV at a crawl, 3 miles per hour. Behind me, the heavy logging chain pulled taut, groaning against the metal of the trailer hitch. Sheriff Grant was no longer the imposing figure who terrified this county. He was a man reduced to his sins. He stumbled, his boots scuffing the asphalt, sweat and dirt streaking the face that used to sneer at victims from behind a desk. Every few hundred yards, his legs would give out, and he'd fall to his knees. The chain would jerk him forward, forcing him to scramble back up or be dragged across the rough road. Get up. I watched him in the rearview mirror. Walk like the man you pretended to be. The town of Oakhaven was waiting. As we turned onto Main Street, the scene was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. It wasn't a mob. It was a tribunal. Hundreds of people lined the sidewalks. Shopkeepers, farmers, teachers, mechanics. They stood in silence. There was no cheering, no jeering. Just a heavy, suffocating silence of judgment. They held up their phones, recording the fall of the tyrant. I saw Mrs. Gable, the librarian whose son Grant had arrested on false charges last year. She stood with her arms crossed, tears streaming down her face. I saw Old Man Miller, no relation to the deputy, whose farm Grant had tried to seize. He tipped his hat at me as I drove past. Grant saw them too. He looked into the faces of the people he had bullied, extorted, and silenced. For the first time, he couldn't hide behind a badge or a gun. He was exposed. Please, Grant whimpered, his voice cracking as he looked at the crowd. I was protecting you. I was the law. You were a parasite, a voice rang out. It was Brooke's friend, Sarah, from the bakery. She stepped off the curb, fearless. You broke her jaw? You broke her life. Look at me, Grant. Grant looked down at his feet, unable to meet her eyes. I tapped the brakes, bringing the SUV to a halt right in the center of the town square, directly in front of the courthouse statue of Lady Justice. I put the car in park and stepped out. The silence held. I walked to the back of the vehicle. Grant was on his knees, panting, clutching his wounded shoulder. Get up, I said softly. He looked up at me. Hunter, enough. You've made your point. They're going to kill me in prison. They might, I said, crouching down to look him in the eye. But before you go, you're going to do one thing. You're going to apologize. Not to me, to them. I pointed at the crowd. And specifically, I pointed to a truck pulling up to the edge of the square, to him. Julian got out of the truck. He was limping, supported by Mr. Henderson. He looked wrecked, physically and emotionally, but his eyes were clear. He walked into the center of the square. The crowd parted for him. Julian stopped 5 feet from Grant. Grant looked at Julian, the man whose wife he stole, whose child he sired, whose inheritance he tried to plunder. Julian, Grant rasped. Julian didn't yell. He didn't strike him. He just looked at him with a profound, crushing pity. I trusted you, Julian said. His voice was quiet, but in the silence of the square, everyone heard it. I invited you to my table. I treated you like a father figure. And you laughed at me. It wasn't like that, Grant lied, desperate. Morgan, she manipulated me. Don't, Julian cut him off. Don't put her name in your mouth. You used us. You used everyone. Julian reached into his pocket. He pulled out the silver star badge that Grant had dropped in the mud back at the station. Julian had picked it up. You dropped this, Julian said. He looked at the badge, then at Grant. It doesn't belong to you anymore. Julian turned and threw the badge into the storm drain at the curb. Clatter. The sound signaled the end of an era. Suddenly, the spell broke. The sound of sirens, real, federal sirens, wailed from the North Road. The FBI barricade I had seen earlier was moving in. Hunter. Ivy's voice came over a megaphone. Step away from the prisoner. We are securing the scene. I looked at Julian. Get back to the sidewalk. I unhooked the chain from the trailer hitch, leaving Grant tethered only to his own shame. I stood over him one last time. The walk is over, Grant, I said. Agents in tactical gear swarmed the square. They moved efficiently, weapons drawn but pointed low. They knew the situation. They surrounded Grant, pulling him to his feet and swapping my iron chains for their steel handcuffs. Grant looked back at me as they shoved him toward an armored van. He looked small. It's not over, Vance, he screamed, trying to muster one last threat. You don't know who I work for. You don't know what's coming. I watched them slam the doors on him. Ivy walked up to me. She looked exhausted but relieved. You really pushed it to the edge, Hunter, she said. Kidnapping, assault, public disturbance. Did you get the files? I asked. We got everything, she nodded. Morgan cracked. She gave us the passwords to the offshore accounts. It's bigger than land fraud, Hunter. We're talking about a multi-state laundering operation. Grant was just a middleman. Good, I said. Then it was worth it. You have to come with me, Ivy said gently. I can't let you just walk away after this parade. We have to process you. I held out my hands. Do what you have to do. As Ivy cuffed me, the crowd erupted. Not in anger, but in applause. It started slow, then built into a roar. They were clapping for the soldier who came home and cleaned house. I saw Julian watching me from the crowd. He nodded. I nodded back. Mission accomplished. But as they led me to the car, I replayed Grant's last words in my head. You don't know who I work for. The snake's head was cut off, but the body was still out there, thrashing in the dark. The holding cell at the federal building was quiet. It didn't smell like the county jail. It smelled like lemon cleaner and bureaucracy. I had been there for 48 hours. No phone, no news. Just the replay of Grant's terrified face in my mind. The door buzzed open. It wasn't a guard. It was Ivy. She wasn't wearing her tactical vest anymore. She was in a sharp navy suit. She dropped a heavy file onto the metal table. You're a free man, Hunter, she said, though she didn't smile. Just like that? I asked, rubbing my wrists. Not just like that, she corrected. The governor's office has been flooded with calls. The video of the sheriff's parade has 5 million views. If they prosecute you for taking down a man who was laundering cartel money and beating women, they lose the next election. You're politically untouchable. She slid a paper across the table. Probation for 1 year. Mandatory counseling for reintegration stress. And your firearms license is suspended for 6 months. I picked up the pen. A small price. There's one more thing, Ivy said, her voice dropping lower. Grant is dead. I froze. How? He didn't make it to arraignment, she said, looking at the wall. He had a severe infection from the gunshot wound, complicated by sudden cardiac arrest in the prison infirmary. I looked at her. We both knew what that meant. Cardiac arrest in a secure wing usually meant someone reached him. The people he was laundering money for, the people he threatened to expose, had tied up the loose end. And Morgan? I asked. She's in witness protection, Ivy sighed. She gave up the entire network. In exchange, she gets a new name and a life in the Midwest. She'll never see Julian or the baby again. The state took custody of the child until paternity and Julian's rights are sorted out. It was a bitter pill, but it was justice. She would live the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. 1 month later, I drove my truck up the winding dirt road to the ranch. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and upcoming winter. The ranch looked different. The broken fences were mended. The barn door, shattered by gunfire, had been replaced with fresh timber. I parked and walked to the porch. Brooke was there. She was standing on her own. No cane, no wheelchair. Her jaw was unwired, though a faint, jagged scar ran along her jawline, a permanent reminder of her survival. She was holding a tray of fresh cinnamon rolls. The smell hit me instantly. The sweet crumb is back in business, I asked, stepping onto the porch. Brooke smiled. It was a real smile, reaching her eyes. Grand opening is tomorrow. We're sold out of pre-orders already. She put the tray down and hugged me. It wasn't the fragile hug of a victim anymore. It was strong. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't do it alone, I said. The screen door opened, and Julian walked out. He looked thinner, but the heavy shadow was gone from his face. He was holding a piece of paper. The divorce is final, Julian said, his voice steady. And the DNA test. The courts ruled that since I was the husband of record, and the biological father is deceased and a criminal, I have standing to adopt the baby if I want. Do you? I asked. Julian looked out at the fields. The kid is innocent, Hunter. It's not his fault who his father was. He shouldn't be punished for their sins. I'm going to raise him. And I'm going to raise him to be a Vance, not a Wilson. I nodded. That was bravery. That was stronger than anything I did with a gun. What about you? Julian asked. Ivy called. She said she has a job for you. Private security consulting. High pay. Low risk. I looked at my brother and sister. I looked at the land our parents left us. I reached into my pocket and touched the notification on my phone. A security alert from the new perimeter system I had installed. I'm not going anywhere, I said. The war is over, but the watch never ends. I'm staying right here. I sat down on the porch swing. The sun was going down, painting the sky in the same purple and red as the night we took the town back. But tonight, there were no sirens. Just the sound of crickets and the wind in the trees. We had scars. We had ghosts. But we had the ranch. And most importantly, we had the truth. Grant thought he was the law, but he forgot the oldest law of the West. You can steal a man's money. You can steal his land. But if you touch his family, you dig your own grave. I took a cinnamon roll from the tray and took a bite. It tasted like home. Welcome back, Hunter, Brooke said softly. It's good to be back, I replied. Author's note to you. That was a heavy ride, wasn't it? We went from the darkest betrayal to the ultimate public justice. I have a question for you. If you were Julian, would you have adopted the baby knowing it was the sheriff's child, or would you have walked away completely? It's a tough choice. Let me know what you would do in the comments below. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know where our squad is located. Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story reached. What should I write next? If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. But I need your help. What kind of story do you want next? Option A husband revenge story where he catches his wife and boss. Option B, a rags to riches revenge story where the rejected son buys the company. Option C, more military/Delta Force justice stories. Let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay safe, watch your back, and remember, loyalty is everything. Signing off.